Great, everyone. I want to welcome you to our Friday Student Zoom Assembly. This is a very special assembly that we pulled together to provide some really great post-election analysis. Before I get started, I just want everyone to take a moment and use the chat box to put in one word that describes how you're feeling right now about the future of politics in the US. Give us a sense of how you're feeling. Oh, Maddie is just meh. Anxious, optimistic, relieved, uncertain, exhausted, energized, Lego, hopeful, on edge. Oh, they're coming in so fast I can't even read them. Conflicted, worried, cautious, determined. We've got the broad spectrum of emotions going on here. Interested, Jordan, excellent. Intrigued, wary. All right, we've got a lot of great adjectives here. Well, it's for exactly all these reasons that Dean Evans and I wanted to pull together a special Zoom assembly just for students and a few welcome staff at the LBJ school today. And this is because we, at this moment in time, want to be able to pause and really hear your questions, your concerns, and get experts in the room to give us their opinion on what happened with the election and what does it portend for the future. So today I'm really delighted to invite three experts to this conversation. I have Bethany Albertson. You can wave here, Bethany. Bethany is an associate professor over in the government department at UT. She's an expert in political psychology and with a lot of work on US elections. If you don't follow Bethany on Twitter, you absolutely should. She not only has some of the best analysis on US politics, it's some of the most snarky comments, which I absolutely love. And she always drives me to really interesting resources about what's going on in US politics. And so welcome, Bethany. We're very happy to have you on this side of campus today.
Thank you.
Also, Rudy Metayer, and please, Rudy, if I butchered your name, please fix it. Rudy is an LBJ alumni, as well as a law school alumni at UT. He's been one of our most active alum in the program. And he's recently re-elected council member in Pflugerville, and I believe, Rudy, you told me that you won re-election with one of the largest margins in Pflugerville's history. Is that correct? Look at that, he's so humble. Oh, we can't hear you. I think we're having trouble with your audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, that works. Now, yeah.
Excellent.
Well, I'm blessed. How about him? I'm lucky. I'm blessed. How about that?
I think you're also very successful. So we welcome you and look forward to your comments on, especially on local politics and Texas state politics. And congratulations. And then finally, of course, our own Dr. Victoria DeFrancesco Soto, Dr. D, probably the most exhausted person at the LBJ school right now, because you spent all of last week and a few weeks before, and even this week on major radio and television stations providing their expert commentary on the election. In fact, many times it was 1 a.m. in the morning, 5 a.m. in the morning. Don't know how you did it. But Dr. D is one of our leading national experts on Latino policy in US elections. And so we're really lucky to have her here at the LBJ school and her perspective on the elections today. So without further ado, what I would actually like to do is to tee up the conversation by just asking our three speakers a few questions and then giving you each maybe 4 to 5 minutes to answer. So my first question is, what, in your expert opinion, are the 2 to 3 big takeaways from the election last week and the outcomes to the extent that we have them? And then secondly, what questions do you think that we as public policy professionals should be asking at this point in time about the resolution of the election results and the post-election environment and big public policy issues coming forth? So those are very broad questions, but I would hope that you could just give us your general thoughts, and then we'll go to Q&A from the students. Bethany, do you mind if we start with you?
No, that's totally fine. It allows me to state the obvious in terms of the big takeaways. Huge engagement, fantastic, right? Voting was up, Voting among young people was up. This is very exciting for those of us who track electoral engagement. And every time they note that voting was up, I want us to remember that it was up even though voting was hard, right? We overperformed in a pandemic. And so that's my cheery takeaway. My less cheery takeaway is my concern about democratic small d norms. I fear further erosion on that front, in particular with the questioning of the electoral results. And we've seen that before. This isn't new. It is different, though, to have the sitting president doing it. And it is alarming to have elected office holders playing that game. We know that our democratic norms are sustained through conversations with each other, through the ways that we talk about politics. We need language to build our norms up, and we need to pay attention to language that subverts them. And then my other takeaway, if I got three, and this is another one that's probably pretty obvious, is that we saw the defeat of Trump. We didn't see the defeat of Trumpism. And so looking forward to the next, I don't know how long in politics, for those people on the left who were looking for a rebuke of Trumpism, it's not there. And so for those people on the right who are moving forward with this political party, the Republican Party will continue to court, to contend with, be responsible to, limited by Trumpism going forward, for better, worse, different, right? Obviously, I think I give away how I feel about this with my concern about democratic norms. Policy moving forward, y'all know way more about policy than I do, but obviously, without the big democratic win, big D this time, that they wanted, they're not going to get as far on the major reforms. And, you know, we have a pandemic to deal with. So that will also constrain what's possible, as that's first and foremost on everybody's agenda has to be the pandemic. And now I'll not say anything more about policy to people who know way more about policy than I do.
Muted. Just to follow up, the second question is, do you think, what question do you think that we really need to be asking right now as public policy professionals? Like, where should we be focusing our energy in our debates and in our research?
For me, it's civic engagement. How do you take what we saw in this election, people who had never voted before, people who had never phone banked before, right? People writing postcards, etc. They saw it as central to like their lives and their future to be involved. And I think moving forward, how do you sustain that, right? How do you keep those people who saw themselves as active participants in the democracy, continuing to have an active role and perhaps more close to home, right? Not writing postcards to send to another state, but finding out what's happening in their local school board, city council, right? Different planning commissions, et cetera, taking that civic energy to their closer to home. And then for people who are in charge of setting these structures up, how are you going to incorporate citizen voices? How are you going to incorporate more diverse voices moving forward? Seems like an obvious place to go.
Thank you, Dr. Albertson. That's a perfect setup for a conversation now with Councilmember Metayer in terms of local politics, civic engagement, and moving forward. So, Councilmember, would you like to first discuss your 2 or 3 big takeaways from the election?
Well, first of all, I want to say Bethany was exactly right. She's like, dude, I get to talk about some of the big stuff that, boom, this has happened, and this is a big deal when you talk about. You're exactly right. And I actually want to elaborate further on something that you said about the defeat of Trump, but not Trumpism. I'm not going to try to be a nerd. But I don't know how many. I'm a philosophy major too. That's what I did undergrad at UT. And I remember the story, The Ring, that Socrates told. And essentially, it was about a story about, hey, wait a minute, if you put this ring on and you're invisible, people will do bad things because it's actually society and the pressure of society and the specific norms of society that push and pressure people to act the right way in accordance with the standards are for society. I think what we're seeing now, which is really fascinating, and what you said regarding what we're talking about, what standards we have in society, is that and again, I'm not trying to get too political on this. You can probably tell where I'm going with what I'm about to say, though. Trump has allowed for people to act badly and poorly and not face consequences for their actions. Because you have that standard that's set up for that, that has changed in a lot of ways the game regarding how things are done or how things are done. Even if you necessarily may not agree with something, you may have acted in a more kosher manner before the last 4 years. And because of that, that's one of the reasons why I think it's a very interesting and dangerous conversation for our country to act like, we're done. Now that we got Biden in office, we're cool. Everything's fine. Because that's just not the case. Because you still had over 70 million people vote for him. And I'm fairly certain, I believe in humanity. I believe in people. It gives me great hopes. I believe in our country. It's one of the reasons why my parents moved here. I truly believe in what we have. But I believe these people made a decision saying, you know what? I don't like his racism. I don't like his sexism, his xenophobia. But I do like my 401k. And I really don't like what the Democratic Party is having to offer. So I'm just gonna, I'll hold my nose. I'm not gonna let anybody know. I think that's another reason why the polls are off. I'm not gonna let anyone know I voted for him, but I'm gonna go ahead and put my vote and cast my lots for him for that. And we've seen that we need to have an honest conversation regarding what are we talking about regarding what we want as a country and what policies in place that all sides can agree to, and I think that one of the hardest things that we've seen, and one of the reasons why you being at the LBJ school is so very important at this moment in time, is that you've got to learn both sides of an argument. You've got to express and expand your viewpoints and understanding, and you've got to not just go ahead and look at somebody as the enemy, but as instead as an American. You can disagree all you want right there, but that person is not the enemy. That person is not an evil person with that. And you've got to step inside that person's shoes and understand their viewpoint. And we've gotten away from that. And you guys are blessed to be at one of the best universities in the country where you can actually have these conversations and get these skill sets done. Because obviously, I hate to say this, but as policymakers, we're failing you in that. We're not doing that. We're not trying to live on both sides of that. And because of that, our country is suffering. There is no reason for people to have felt like, hey, listen, we may not like Trump, but we're going to go with what he's going. When we all know, we've all grown in a certain fashion about what's right or wrong. Mm-hmm. So sorry to go on a diatribe about that.
You. And just to follow up that, because you were an empath student, I want to put you in a position of, hypothetically, pretend that you're now back at the LBJ school and you're teaching in the empath program or at LBJ. What question would you put forth to your students? It says, for the next year or two, this is the question I want you to grapple with as you learn at the LBJ school.
Wow. Okay. And this is, and it's awkward because Dean Evans is in front of me, but I'll give her a lot of credit for this as well. One of the things that we had a conversation about years ago was the fact that many people who were conservatives felt uncomfortable expressing their viewpoints at the LBJ school. And I found that disheartening from the fact, okay, I may be a Democrat myself, but I feel like everyone should be able to express their viewpoints and ideas. And if you're not able to learn in this atmosphere, the different viewpoints and ideas and understand it and understand rapport, what are you going to do outside of there? What are you going to do? Because it's not like those things are going to go away once you step off the 40 acres. And, for me, going back as a council member, one of the reasons why I was able to get elected by 67% of the population was the fact that people saw me both sides because, remember, it's technically a nonpartisan race at the city council level, but they saw what I did. They never recognized a Republican pothole or a Democratic wastewater pipe. They saw that, hey, listen, he's trying to solve issues, work for things and get things done. And that's what we need to be able to expect. You've got to understand them. You don't have to agree with it. I'm not telling you to agree with it, but you've got to. And so I would challenge you, what are you doing at the school to expand your viewpoint and go ahead and hear from others, to see their viewpoints and understanding right there as well? Because I think if anything this election has shown, we're evenly divided and we're not giving ground to each other whatsoever.
Yeah, very, very powerful point there. Dr. D, do you want to chime in here and give us your 3 big takeaways after a whirlwind couple of weeks for you?
Sure. Thanks so much, Kate. So Bethany stole most of my thunder. Bethany, who, you see her here and she's very calm and professorial, but if you don't already follow Bethany on Twitter, you have to follow her on Twitter. My husband recently got off Twitter about a year or two ago. He's like, I'm done with Twitter. But he's like, the only thing I miss about Twitter is Bethany. So all of that to say is, when it comes to political insight and a very sharp, witty, and data-based political insight, this is the woman to follow. And building on what Bethany said in terms of turnout and division, those are always my 2 big takeaways. I think we broke the record in terms of percentage of turnout of the electorate. We hadn't seen this type of turnout in 120 years. So this is huge. And then among the Latino electorate, which I'll get to in a second in terms of a little deeper dive, we broke the 50% mark, which is huge for us. Latinos have always lagged in terms of turnout, never really cracking that 50% ceiling. And we're seeing essentially 60% of the Latino electorate having been turned out. We're super divided, right? This was not a landslide for one side or the other. We are a divided nation. And one thing I will point to, kind of going the next step down, is that among our states, we're still very divided. The Democrats had high hopes of flipping a number of state legislatures because they wanted that footprint, but especially in a redistricting year coming off of a census, and not one legislative chamber flipped for the Ds. So we are where we are essentially in 2010, 2011. So that's going to be also very challenging for the Ds, who had this vision of how to kind of turn things around for themselves. With regards to the Latino electorate, turnout is one piece of the story. We saw incredible turnout nationally, but especially here in Texas. And the other part of the Latino story is we are and continue to be a very diverse population. Big picture, let's stand back. Joe Biden, the Democratic candidate, got 70% of the Latino vote in aggregate. Depending on what polls you look at, it may waver from mid 60s to high 60s to 70, but let's just, call it 70% for the sake of it. But what's been, very much in the news is, well, what happened in Florida and what happened in Texas? And we can dig into it a little bit later in the Q&A, but the story here is understanding the diversity of this population, that we've always seen the Latino electorate have a diversity. In the George W. Bush years, you saw that the Republican vote going as high as 42, 43%. Trump not coming that close, but still getting around 30% of the vote. So this is about understanding regional nuances, intergenerational nuances, racial nuances. And this then ultimately also translates into policy and understanding what the policy preferences and the policy needs and the policy wants of the Latino electorate are, is again, diverse, and understanding that as well. So for me, those are the big top 3 takeaways nationally that obviously filter down into where we are on the ground here in Texas.
Great, and let me follow up with that about the big questions we're asking. Dean Evans put something in the box about basically asking about how we treat Trumpists and Trumpism. And we do tend to throw around this term in a very homogenous manner, like all people who support Trump look the same, act the same, have the same interests. But what you're telling us is there's a huge amount of diversity and people who support Trump individually, but also support GOP platforms. So moving forward as public policy professionals, how do we need to sort of rethink the questions we're asking about the way we understand voters that steps away from this, let's call it the fallacy of homogeneity? How nerdy is that, Rudy?
Well, it's stereotyping, right? We have these
Yeah.
stereotypes about our voters. And look, in terms of, let's look at Florida, Miami-Dade voters. For them, it was about foreign policy at the end of the day, kind of this vision of our relationship with Latin America, our relationship with Venezuela, our relationship with Cuba. So understanding that those Miami-Dade Cubans who voted overwhelmingly for President Trump were coming at it from more of a foreign policy piece. And there are kind of also historical components involved of the tradition of the Republican Party in that electorate. When we're looking at South Texas, one of the big pieces, and I'm not even getting into the turnout and how effective the campaigns were, right? That's separate. The economic piece, the pocketbook politics were really powerful. So in some of those counties that either voted for Trump or came very close to Trump, we know from folks on the ground that the issue of oil and gas really resonated because a lot of folks in their households work in the oil and gas industry. So this is something else that we need to consider when we're looking at not just national politics, but state politics. This is the stuff that is on the minds of our population down in the Rio Grande Valley. How do we meet them and support them in terms of their economic equity issues, and being concerned that if oil and gas starts going into renewable energy, are they still going to be able to put food on the table for their family?
Great, thank you so much. We're starting to get some great questions in the chat box. So I'd actually now like to invite Quentin, who had the first question. If maybe you can turn your mute off, Quentin, and ask panelists.
Sure. So this has been something I've been watching pretty closely and was a little disappointed with the results. So what do you guys think is the future of the Democratic Party in Texas? I was watching the Central Texas races pretty closely with Mike, Julie, Wendy, and they all lost by a pretty large margin. And yeah, I've been following some accounts and articles and editorials, and a lot of people feel like the Democrats played their full hand this cycle, and that might get used against them during redistricting with this new data that was generated. So I just kind of wanted y'all's take on that.
Just as a first cut, I think for a lot of people, well, me too, it was alarming that they lost, and they lost by larger margins than 2018. But I would also encourage you to look back. The appropriate comparison, arguably, is not 2018, but 2016 and 2012, right? These presidential year elections. 18 is a midterm, and it's particular in lots of ways, right? Lots of people upset with Trump turned out and boosted the Democratic Party across the country, right? And so if you look at the margins of 10 and 25 and these central districts, there has been a steady decline in terms of Republican advantage, looking just at the presidential election. So that's one kind of caution in terms of interpreting the margins this year. And then the other, and I'm just, every time Stacey Abrams is in the news, I promise you, I remind everyone, like, you have to know the LBJ connection. Like, that is I do the requisite LBJ shout out every time, because she's quite popular, it turns out. And I was listening to her the other day talk about how Georgia was a 10-year project. And that just, it resonates for me in terms of what the Democratic Party is trying to do in Texas is going to be a long project.
Rudy, may
I would add.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I would add this too. As a Black man, given what point we are in our country, the assumption, the impression would be that when we're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and looking at true systemic change when it comes to racism, would reverberate with everybody across whatever norm, whatever socioeconomic group, et cetera, right there as well. When you see a murder of a man filmed in front of you, that changes the whole mindset and concept of things with that. And with that said, I think the concern for me, Quentin, to your point, is that I don't know if the messaging is matching the campaigning, which is matching the legislation. And, you know, when you're looking at things like how defund the police was utilized as a weapon to go ahead and destroy a lot of smart, pragmatic ideas that when you look at them, you're saying, wait a minute, why would we have officers go ahead and become social workers? Why should it be the ones who deal with drug abuse and all those counselors right there as well? Why aren't we looking at preventative ways to make sure that we're not using law enforcement as the backstop to go into these issues? That makes perfect sense. But if you don't have the messaging that goes with that, when you have people who are able to co-opt that message, start saying, oh, well, you're just trying to get rid of all police, you hate all police. And, you know, something really offensive to me is that when they say that people of color just despise police, it's like, listen, we don't like bad officers, which no one should like bad officers, period, whatsoever. And you have that messaging being co-opted and utilized in a manner, in a campaign manner. When you just I saw the same ad you saw, Quentin, with, you know, Wendy trying, she hates the police, and MJ, oh, she's too radical. You know, all these other things with that. That's disconcerting because it makes me wonder, what are we doing to go ahead and make sure that message isn't done that way, that the true ideas and concepts that are being proposed and articulated are done in a manner when you do so? Because when you look at the stats, you look at all the studies, when you talk about these things to moderates or conservatives about that, they overwhelmingly say, oh yeah, these are great ideas. But once you mention defund the police, that just totally changes the whole status quo with these things. And I really wonder, when are we going to be, because I feel like the activists are on the same on the other side of the coin regarding the policymakers. We're two sides of the same coin. And you've got to have those things matching to be able to go ahead and get things done in true systemic change on these issues.
Great, thank you. Vicki, if you don't mind, I'm gonna go to some more questions just to make sure students get to ask. We'll make sure we come back to you. I have an order, Carolina Mueller, Raymond Wayan, Alex Rose, and then Brianna Murphy. So I'm gonna go in that order. And when you speak, if you could also introduce yourself briefly, what degree programming you're in and what year, and maybe just a word about your policy interests. So Caro, are you online?
I am. Hi, I'm Carolina. I am a second-year Master's of Public Affairs student, about 3/4 of the way through, almost, not quite standing, but trying to. And my policy focuses on food systems and agriculture. And so my question is about the boundary of where policy is actually effective, because I think one of the things that's really been super eye-opening for me from going to school is just how much policy can't do and just how much politics can't do. And so I hear you, Councilmember Rudy, talking about how activists and and policies are two sides of the same coin. But there is a clear distinction between what we can actually accomplish with laws and what we need to be accomplishing through community building and through mutual aid and through all of these networks that already have existed for so many years, especially in communities that have been oppressed by the white supremacist Democrat, the Democratic Party is one of them, right? Still to this day. And so how do y'all as policy professionals sort of work to bolster these survival techniques that we are seeing happening that are completely outside of the realm of any kind of institution and any kind of policy? So just curious what y'all's thoughts are on that.
Who would like to take a stab at this one? Vicki, do you want to chime in?
Sure. So, and I'm teaching Latino policy development this semester. So we kind of went through our executive branch, our legislative branch, judicial, we're on lobbying and advocacy now. And I think that we need to understand it's more of a matter of degree than something being, yes or no. Like, will we see policy being able to be developed or not with the constraints that we're looking at? And look, if I were a betting woman, I think that it's probably going to stay Republican. There's a path for the Democrats, but it's probably going to be Republican. It's going to be difficult for President-elect Biden to really see a bold agenda of change put forward. But, if you took my class and we went through the executive orders and the kind of executive branch stuff, the devil can be in the details, and there's a lot that can be done within the executive branch. To begin with, executive orders, the good and the bad, presidents can put them forward, but they can also take them back. So a lot of these orders that were put into place under the Trump administration can be rescinded on day one by the Biden administration. And he can try to do some governing through there. And then also remember, so much stuff happens at the agency level and the rule change level. So yeah, we're not going to see something big and huge like the ACA pass or comprehensive immigration reform. I don't know. I would love to see that, but in this divided climate, I think it's going to be a heavy lift. But don't forget the important change that happens at the smaller level. And I do think we'll see some important legislative compromises. You know, I don't know the Hill. I'm just getting this kind of from secondhand gossip, but that President-elect Biden and Mitch McConnell have a good relationship. You know, they're not besties, but that they're willing to work together. They've been in the Senate together. So I think that also paves the way for some important policy wins for the American public. Again, nothing major, but it's sometimes it's about the little steps. Something is better than nothing. And for the Democrats, I think it's coming into the new administration with that vision.
Councilmember Rudy, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that Vicky put it best, but you'll see some incremental change, and maybe that's what America's telling you, right? That they're not ready for a huge, substantial wave of changes, but they're ready to go ahead and get an incremental change. But something that the great Gretz did, the question that she asked about these existing institutions and how are we leveraging these? And this is a really good point, a really key point. I think, and it goes back to my whole thought process about how are we understanding each other's viewpoints and ideas, and how are we going about in our own different lives. So one of the things I always talked about at UT was that, you know, you're around the most diverse group of people you ever will be in your life. So take advantage of it, get to know people, understand different viewpoints, et cetera. Because the older you get, you start segmenting into different places and where you go from there as well. I mean, you may practice law, different neighborhoods, different cities, church groups, et cetera, right there. You start getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And honestly, you only have a finite amount of time. So it takes a lot of energy and work to expand outside of those zones to meet or hear from other people, you know, to viewpoints and ideas and concepts. But I will say for a fact, for me, that's been key to my success here in Pflugerville. I will be completely blunt with that. You know, there is a group of old white men that I have breakfast with every Friday at one of the shops here in Pflugerville. And we talk about a myriad of issues, et cetera, right there as well. And these are some very staunch Republicans. And these, and in their yards, the signs you saw were re-elect Rudy Metayer and re-elect Trump. You saw those signs that are in the yards right there as well. But what's the difference? They know me. They understand my viewpoints. They're hearing my viewpoints and ideas. And it's been fascinating, particularly after, you know, with everything going on with the, you know, regarding social justice movement right here, to hear from them, because they're saying, hey, I don't understand this. Where's this coming from? And then hearing from me because they know me and they trust my viewpoint, saying, hey, listen, I may be an educated Black man, but there are things that I'm concerned about. I worry about just walking down the street when I'm wearing t-shirts and shorts. I do teach my kids about the talk. I have had things happen with me as well. And, you know, and it's different when you personalize it, right? Because then you're able to say, oh, wow, well, you know what? I don't understand what they're saying over here on TV, but I do know Rudy. And if Rudy's saying this, there's got to be some legitimacy to what's going on with that. And me on the other side with that. Hey, wait a minute. You know, Kate, you said it best. We can't demonize and think everyone who's a Trump supporter is a Klansman and everything else out there, et cetera, right there as well. Now, I'm not going to tell you that the Klansmen are going to be voting for Biden. That's another story. But what you do say is that you try to understand, you're saying, okay, what is it about that why would you vote for a person like that? What is it about the Democratic Party that you're concerned or uncomfortable with doing that? And I think that's what Vicky was talking about, the Latino population. My parents are Haitian immigrants. Go back and read about Papa Doc and Baby Doc Duvaliers. If you want to talk about how one democracy can go one way and we'll go the other, compare IAT to the US. So for me, I know all too well how important, how blessed it is to be able to have the ability to vote to have opinions, to express your opinions in the country, because there's a country right down the road from you where people were regularly killed and murdered for speaking their truths and ideas from that as well. So it's hard when we try to just, I think Vicky said it best, we try to lump everyone together, right? But we're all complicated people, and we're all trying to discern ourselves, our viewpoints and ideas, and try to get where we're at.
That's a really powerful point about how personal politics can be. And I love the fact that you do have breakfast every week with these group of old white men. At some point before the Zoom session ends, you're going to have to explain why you're in a room with a Bud Light sign behind you as well, because you get a 10 on your Zoom background here. But I would like to move forward with questions. And Raymond actually politely pointed out, Alex, that you were next in line. So my apologies. Can you ask your question?
Sure, no problem. Hi, I'm Alex Rose. I'm a first-year MPAF student and studying national security, also interested in arts funding and equality and civic engagement. So thank you so much. This has been really thought-provoking so far. I think I have just a sort of like flip the coin a little bit, and I'm curious to talk a little bit more about the opportunity in a post-Trump Republican Party, because I really do see it as an opportunity. I think that a lot of issues have been really politicized and really put down this strict binary, and there are a lot of people that have been ostracized in that process that really believe in a lot of the core values of the Democratic Party, but are still going to vote Republican for ideological reasons. And I'm just working through this right now. This election's really brought up a lot of that. So I'm just curious to get your thoughts. And I've loved everything that y'all have said so far. So thanks.
Thank you, Alex Rose. If I could actually turn to Dr. Albertson, because her area of expertise is political psychology. So I have a feeling you've got some thoughts on this issue.
Oh, I have thoughts. I don't have answers. But, things to puzzle over. We've seen places where progressive policies are faring better than progressive candidates. And so what's happening that these candidates can't win, but their policies are winning? And I'm thinking about, $15 minimum wage in Florida. I'm thinking about returning citizen voting rights in Florida. I'm thinking about, marijuana legalization. A host of things through the initiative process got passed in places that continue to vote Republican. And so I think that's a question to think about, like what's happening where people are for Medicaid expansion, for instance, while supporting Republican politicians who aren't. That seems to be a place of opportunity for the Democratic Party moving forward to try to capture their voters, those voters. And then the other one that's harder, I think, is on the Republican side. If you're looking for a hopeful sign of a post-Trump Republican Party where, the undergrads I teach, the young conservatives who don't like the messing with political institutions or the racism, but want a party for their conservative ideas, I don't see it right now. Right? Because all of the people who were anti-Trump in the Republican Party are losing their jobs or are retiring. And the current ones are pretending that it's okay to not respect the outcome of an election. And they all know, right? But they're willing to pretend because they're scared of some tweets or something. So I'm less hopeful on that front. I would love to be wrong.
Great, thank you. Unless Dr. D or Councilmember Metayer want to weigh in, I think I'm just going to try to get through as many student questions as possible. Is that okay? All right, thank you. Raymond, can I invite you to ask your question?
Yes, and thank you so much, everyone. And it's good to see so many folks on the call. Happy Friday. So I kind of wanted to go back to something that Councilmember Metayer said and maybe ask for him and maybe Dr. D to weigh in here and anyone else who wants to, but one question, two parts. Okay, so you talked about students feeling safe and at the LBJ school expressing disparate political perspectives. And of course, this is a conversation that I'm try to stay up on, and it's definitely a prominent conversation among many groups here. Also, I'm second year empath, also the inaugural Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the GPAC, Graduate Political Affairs Council here at LBJ, a student body, nominated and elected by my peers to talk about issues of equity and inclusion and diversity. And so my question is, what does it mean to feel safe, slash, how do we create a healthy marketplace of ideas here in a policy school? When I talk to a lot of my colleagues who are, Black women, they talk about how, very few places in the world for them are safe. And for folks like me, white men, most of the world is safe. And so what does it mean to feel unsafe and safe in these conversations? What is what is safety? What should students be prepared to, I feel like if you have an opinion, you should say it out loud. And if someone is gonna talk to you, like, don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid of your ideas not being welcomed. But I know a lot of people don't feel safe, and I wanna respect that. My next part of my question is, council member, with the folks that you talk to on the ground there, Pflugerville's a suburb. What shared values do you see that can bring disparate sides together? So hyper local at LBJ, and then moving out to the greater community at large. And I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much.
Raymond, thank you as always for the really tough questions. Councilmember Metayer, would you like to take a first stab at this? And then maybe we'll go to Dr. D for her perspective on the LBJ environment.
Yeah, and that's a really, really good question. And for you guys who don't know, so Pflugerville's the third fastest growing city in the country. It went from an old white German town to a majority minority city overnight. When I say overnight, I mean literally adding about 50, 60,000 people over here. So, our population now is about 80. Extraterritorial jurisdiction, you're at about another, 35, 40. So you're about 120 out here. And yet the issues that you saw regarding policing and a lot of things that you see when you see a city, let's be honest, when you see a city turn, it's majority minority, you haven't seen those things here. We have a police force that's probably about 87% white, but they have a 95% approval rating. And it kind of goes to my point about, we all don't like bad policing. That's our issue right there. But what does the police force do? They do community policing, and they've been doing community policing. It's not something that's, it's put on the books. It's not some sort of esoteric idea about it. No, they're involved in the community, and you know them, you talk to them, and you meet them, not in the contentious times when you're at a stop, because that's more likely when you're going to stop, but you see them, talking to your kids, working different events, for free, and frankly, stopping kids during the summertime who are wearing helmets and bicycles. And what are they getting stopped for? To get a free ice cream cone over at the local Dairy Queen because they're following the law. You have those efforts to do that. And I think that the commonalities that we have as a people, we got to realize that as Americans, is that we all want good schools. We all want access to healthcare. We all want to be able to go and feel like we're safe and secure in our communities. These are basic tenets that are involved with everything involved with that as well. And, that's what's so frustrating about when you see what's happened regarding COVID-19 and people just being shocked by this. This pandemic, make no mistake, it didn't bring about all these issues. All it was an x-ray of what's going on in this country in the first place. We know that why are African Americans disproportionately affected by that? Well, guess what? They're at these frontline jobs being paid these medium wage incomes that in fact does not actually help be where they need to be to take care of their families. When you talk about what's going on, comorbidities when it comes to healthcare, well, guess what? If you go ahead and you don't have a doctor's office near you, if you live in a food desert, you're going to go ahead and eat all these ridiculous foods, fast foods, and everything else from that. And these basic tenets, these basic ideas that we all want for our families, that's where I think the commonality falls and comes together. Because then you see yourselves not necessarily as competing for one each other for resources, but coming together to make sure they're uplifted from that. And that's something that is hard to articulate and do if you're staying in your own sphere and your own silo. And what's been really great is that you having people who have expanded from that, work from there to make it where that's at. Make no mistake, it's not easy to do, but I think Pflugerville is an example that it can be done. Good question, really good question.
We have a few related questions in the chat box, but just for the sake of respecting the queue of questions, I'm going to go ahead and move forward with questions. Vicki, I do want to give you a chance to weigh in here because Raymond had a great question about how we create a safe and conducive environment for these difficult discussions, specifically at the LBJ school. Would you like to speak to that?
Yes, and it's about putting work, and it's about feeling uncomfortable. So these are not new themes to the students here on this assembly, and it goes from our little microcosm of the LBJ world to our national level politics, which is we have to engage first and foremost. But in engaging, it's also saying where you come from, what your needs are, and understanding where other folks are coming from, and having difficult conversations, you know, whether that's in the halls of Congress or whether it's on these student Zoom assemblies amongst the students themselves, with the students and us. So for me, my true north has always been that making sure everybody is at the table, and then at that table we engage, and you have to build a space where folks are open to coming. You know, the worst thing in the world is apathy. So I feel that over the past couple of years, we've done a very good job of setting that table and inviting folks to the table. And it's an ongoing process of intentionally cultivating those difficult conversations so we understand what we need and then what we do about it. You know, what is the implementation beyond that?
Thank you so much, Vicki. Just for the sake of moving on, I'd like to give Brianna Murphy an opportunity to come online and ask her question.
Hi, I'm Brianna. I'm a first year empath DC student, and my question is pretty similar to Alex Rose's, so I'll keep it brief. But I was just wondering, you know, what does it take to convince somebody who may have voted for Trump, who found him to be unpalatable? What does it take for them to compromise their, you know, values for economic policy or what have you? Because they don't necessarily see a candidate as fit. Like how can, you know, in that situation, how can Democrats strategically try to capture votes when people are hesitant to give up like their core political values, even though they don't necessarily like the candidate?
The critical question is actually enduring about interests versus values and how we vote. Right? I've been asking similar questions about how do I understand individual voting behavior? And I'm a political scientist and I have no answer to that question. So do any of our experts on the panel have an answer to that very important question?
Let me take a stab at this, because this ties into another question that was asked earlier. And part of it is understanding that there are people you will never move. Like if you've ever worked on a campaign, you'll know that, you know, the campaign, the first thing that they do is they look at the voters, they know who their base are, they know who's with them, they know who is absolutely not with them, and then you look at the middle and you try to reach them. So essentially, for the purposes of your question, you take that dumbbell piece of it and you're like, okay, right, we're not going to deal with that. There are some people who you'll never convince, but it's that middle, the persuadables, even if they're Republican, how can you get them to vote and support Biden or vice versa? I've always been a big proponent of old school politics, shoe leather politics. And one of the weaknesses that the Democrats had was that because of the pandemic, you didn't see as much direct mobilization. And direct mobilization is more effective than indirect mobilization. And it's especially important for lower SES voters, namely Black and brown folks, especially Latinos. So I think that it's about having those conversations. It's about block walking and getting invited into a living room in South Texas and having a cafecito with a family. So for those folks who maybe were Trump supporters before, and you know, you want to the Biden camp, or just, you know, they're on one side, but they're potentially movable, it is directly engaging with them and talking about the issues. And the last thing you want to do is fall into the stereotype labeling, which regrettably politics does so often. So it's about meeting folks where they are, understanding their needs, and painting the picture of why your candidate, why your platform provides that. But to begin with, you need to have that direct contact.
For the sake of time, I just want to warn everyone that we've got a very sharp cutoff at 1 o'clock because we've got ongoing events with our open house for prospective students. So I want to have just one more question. Quentin very respectfully bowed out of the queue so that Ana Perez could have a chance to ask some of her excellent questions. So Ana, if you're still online, can you unmute?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Anna. I'm a second year MPAF student. Mainly have been studying criminal justice and immigration issues, but I'm also interested in municipal governance. I had a couple questions, but since it's a kind of like post-op of the election, I was really curious about y'all's thoughts on the Latino vote in the Rio Grande Valley. I know it's kind of hard to account for the pandemic, and as Dr. D is talking about, you know, ground game and canvassing is really important in some of these communities, but I was just curious why, you know, Sanders did really well in the primary, and why you think that the Democratic Party, instead of embracing more progressive platforms that have like universal appeal, as Bethany Albertson was saying with the minimum wage, like why aren't we embracing more of those platforms, especially in light of how ineffective the Lincoln Project and some of these like trying to move moderates campaigns were?
Who would like to take a shot at that?
This is probably an unsatisfactory answer, but it's a teaser. I'm in the works of putting together a major Latino post-mortem political analysis with some of the big wigs, the Latino Decisions folks. We're going to partner with Center for Mexican American Studies, where I promise you, Ana, we will get into those nitty-gritty details. But really quickly, it's there are a lot of factors at play here. And in South Texas, like Florida, remember that the Republican Latino outreach was on point. Like they knew what happened in 2018 and they went out strong. So here in Texas, for a fact, let me give you one example and we'll end with that. The Gina Ortiz Jones district in El Paso, that was Will Hurt's district. So the Democrats, because of public health concerns, were not turning, you know, we're not doing block walking. Whereas Tony Rodriguez, they knocked on 27,000 doors. So that's one factor, right, to understand why she lost that district. The other piece is when you go over the Rio Grande Valley, which is a little different than El Paso, you have those oil and gas concerns. And you also have the issue that you tend to see a little bit more ideological and moral conservatism. So long answer to say, short answer rather, there are a lot of factors at play here. And because we are policy people, we can't just go to the one, like, oh, they need more progressive politics. That's not necessarily the answer. In some areas that may be the case, but we need to go in here with a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer in understanding how we connect with different Latino populations. But stay tuned because we're going to have a great event sometime in the early new year.
Terrific. I really look forward to that. It's everyone else. I want to invite Dr. Albertson and Councilman Metayer to maybe make some closing comments. Bethany, would you like to start? Just it could be one word if you like.
Position right now of asking questions, and so you know, and Anna says the Lincoln Project didn't work, and I'm thinking, do we know that? I'm not so sure we know that. there are likely some subpopulations it worked for, and some groups it didn't work for. And so, yeah, I would just encourage people to approach the post-election period with curiosity. I mean, the mixed findings, you'll see this in the media. I felt like the mixed findings meant that everyone was able to pick out something to support their priors, right? And we had a bazillion like think pieces the next day that are like, haha, this is the answer. Now I understand it. And I don't understand it yet. And the exit polls are complicated. They're always complicated. They're particularly complicated this time. And so I want to take more time before, you know, to diagnose the like winning strategy for a party moving forward. And also keep in mind that, you know, big tent parties who have multiple strategies and diverse coalitions. And so what works in Texas is different than Arizona, is different than California, even among like a subset of the population. But, you know, back to the opening, the things we know for sure, we know engagement was up. And so I think sustaining that is important moving forward. In times of anxiety, in times of stress, you can get this big engagement, which is great. What I worry about, particularly my, you know, undergraduates that I teach are disproportionately Democrats who like went all in on this election. And they didn't get the big one when they wanted. And so my worry coming out of this is like, okay, I tried electoral politics, I got involved and it didn't go the way I wanted to, and now I'm done. And so a time of anxiety and stress around politics can bring engagement, but it could also bring people to say, you know what, that's just not for me. That's, you know, I'm going to go put my energies in something else. And I'm hopeful that we can come up with ways to keep people involved.
Very good concluding remarks. Thank you, Bethany. We're going to say farewell to Dr. D as well. She's got a 1 o'clock meeting. But the final word, Rudy, go for it.
Wow, no pressure. I'll say this, breathe. We're going to be okay. I am not going to lie to you that I am so interested in hearing from each and every one of you, because this has to be one of the most dynamic times literally in the history of this country to be a student on a college campus and talking about these issues and debating these issues and reflecting how this is going to affect your future and what's going to happen from here. But look at the corollary of that. You are on a college campus talking about these issues, debating these things, helping to be the leaders to help shape the future. That's awesome. And that's phenomenal. And it tells you about how much of an influence you're going to have on what the trajectory does of not only this state, but this country. I will reiterate to you, I just heard me say it a couple of times, is that truly take the time to hear and understand other viewpoints. Don't make assumptions. What Bethany said, what Vicki said right now, I mean, we'll have plenty of time to go ahead and, you know, Monday morning quarterback a lot of these things, right? There, wait for the information, everything else to come out. Don't just assume these things. But also at the same time, think about where we are as a country from what you see, what you see the battle line staying right there as well. This side's not going anywhere. This side's not going anywhere. So the only way things are going to get done is if each other come together and talk about these issues right there as well. And it doesn't mean, I don't know when the word compromise became a dirty word. That doesn't mean you're selling out your soul, your values, or anything like that as well. That's the way government works. If you look at the history of this country and you see the big substantial changes outside the ACA, it happened in divided government. And we've got to look and see what we can do to go ahead and work and reach across the other side and understand each other's viewpoints. They're not the enemy. You're debating them vigorously to make your viewpoints and ideas, but they're not the enemy. Learn their viewpoint, respect their viewpoint, see where you can compromise, where you don't. But if you start looking, the majority of us agree on 90% of the issues. We really, really do. And we're blessed to understand that. What's that 10%? So maybe if we start talking about the 90% that we start working on, maybe then we can start making dents in that 10%. But each and every one of you, you're going to have a huge hand in what this future looks like. And that's an awesome responsibility. And I can't wait to see what each and every one of you do.
Thank you so much. That is exactly the kind of inspiring and optimistic message we really need to hear on this Friday. So everyone take Councilmember Rudy Metayer's advice, breathe, and then roll up your sleeves and get active. And we want to thank Rudy and Bethany for your activities, your engagement with politics, and your incredibly insightful analysis. Thank you both for taking time on a Friday, and I want to wish everyone a great weekend.
Oh, you asked about the sign. I'm on an urban development meeting right now, and we're at Typhoon, Texas. So I had to find a location that was away from everybody so I can take off my mask and then sit down and talk to you guys right there as well. But you know what? It is Friday, so yeah, y'all go get a beer.
Okay. Great advice. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Take care.